Welcome to night 2 of the AP Human Geo Cram previews. So excited to be here. My name is Steven. I am a member of the Fiveable team, and I'm super excited to be introducing this awesome crew. We got a lot of good stuff in store for you all tonight. But before we get started, we do have a really short video by our founder of Fiveable, Amanda.
Woo! Let's go, AP Human Geo. I'm like your hype woman tonight. My name is Amanda Duamerol. I am the founder and CEO of Fiveable. I used to teach AP Human Geography, so you're one of my favorites. Don't tell anybody. And I'm really excited. I've been helping students feel confident for AP exams for quite a long time. So you are in the right place because I hate to stress you out a little bit more right now, but your test is a week from Thursday. I know this is probably your first AP test. I know the nerves are high, the anxiety is high, but I promise you, you're in the right place. We've got a whole crew of students who have taken this test before, and they are prepped and ready to teach you about a whole lot of concepts in the coming week. Tonight, we're going to focus on globalization. This is an important concept for this course. And it's especially difficult if you've never taken a world history class before. So they're going to run through it. They're going to go through everything you need to know about it. And you'll get a sense of what it feels like to be in a cram session. If you were here last week, you know that this is a community. We're here to support each other. Like, I know that you're stressed out, but you don't have to do this alone. That's what crams are about. You have other students from around the world all going through the same thing at the same time, and you get to experience this together. So before test day for you, we're going to be live for 5 nights. So Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday night for 3 hours each. That's 15 hours of live reviews running through every single unit, FRQs, multiple choice, everything. Plus lots of little pep talks sprinkled all around. So we're going to get you ready. Make sure you have your cram pass so that you can attend those next events. Tonight is free, but those next ones, you will need a cram pass. That's a $15 pass. It's like $1 per review hour. That link is below so that you can make sure you get it before Saturday. With that, I'm going to leave you to it. Let's get into it with globalization. Over to you, AP Human Geography hosts. Let's go.
Hi everyone, welcome to night 2 of our cram schedule for AP Human Geography. I am one of your hosts for tonight, Cosette.
And I'm Emily. We're so excited to bring you guys into globalization. And here we have an outline of what the cram schedule for the paid days leading up to the test will look like.
All right, also make sure to follow Think Fiveable on all social medias to stay updated with what Fiveable has going on. And also make sure to get your cram pass before so you can start reviewing your content because the AP exam is coming up.
And then we'll kick it off with our cram preview, which is globalization. A quick run through of our itinerary is we'll talk about what globalization is. We'll talk about all different types of cultural and social globalization, economic, political, and environmental, and then we'll close with a Q&A. So let's hand it off to Cassette with what is globalization.
All right, so let's dive into what exactly is globalization. So globalization is going to be a big topic in AP Human, and it's honestly something that can be difficult to understand, but once broken down, I think it's a very cool topic, and it applies to a lot of the units you have in AP Human Geo. So the official definition of globalization is the process of increasing interconnectedness and interdependence among people, economies, and societies around the world. So it's kind of trifold when you think about it. Globalization technically involves the spread of ideas, information, goods, services, and people, basically almost anything you can think of across national borders and around the world. So it's basically going to be the movement of these different items, concepts, anything you can imagine really that interconnects the world. And finally, we can understand that globalization can have both positive and negative effects. When people look at globalization, they often think either it's good or it's bad. However, what we have to understand is that in AP Human Geo, globalization is something that is complex. And depending on its context and the perspective of the different groups you're looking at, it can have that positive or negative connotation. So let's dive into the historical background. So globalization has been occurring throughout human history for a while, but it accelerated immensely in the late 20th century due to a series of advancements. These include advancements in technology, transportation, and communication, which has helped to spread these ideas and physical goods all across the world. Furthermore, we can see that especially new technologies such as the internet, like we're using today, and social media has made it extremely easier for people to connect and communicate their ideas or whatever across far distances and across these national borders. And furthermore, when we look at the growth of international trade and investment when looking at economies, we can see that this has led to increased economic integration and interdependence among countries around the nation. And finally, we can look at how the rise of global governance institutions and political things, and such as the United Nations and the World Trade Organization, they have all facilitated cooperation and coordination among different countries. So some of the causes that we've identified for globalization and that you should have gone over are how they're complex and multifaceted. And these can include different types of globalization, including economic, political, social, and technological factors. Some of the key drivers of globalizations that we've discussed are going to include the advancements of technology again, transportation, and communication. Specifically, we can look into trade liberalization and foreign investment, the spread of cultural ideas and norms, and the increasing importance of global environmental issues. Now, I'll be passing it off to Emily now to dive into cultural and social globalization.
All right, perfect. Let's take a look at more specific globalization and to cultural and social globalization. First, let's start off with the definition of cultural and social globalization. This type of globalization typically deals with the spread of culture, customs, or ideas from one place or group of people to other locations. A few key things to note here is that the impact that cultural globalization has on existing cultures is both positive and negative. And you'll see this with all different types of globalization because nothing's perfect and there's always positives and negatives to everything. For example, for some positives, there are the introduction of new foods, music, languages, and sports. These can all provide opportunities for people to experience and appreciate new perspectives and new cultures. And it definitely can have its benefits, but also the negative impacts on society and cultures can result in the loss of cultural diversity, cultural conflicts, and perhaps even cultural appropriation. The globalization of culture can lead to a common global culture due to new innovations that make the world feel smaller because of the time-space compression and increased communication, tourism, and travel also all lead to a global culture. Globalization can also occur through types of diffusion, which is an important concept to be able to know for AP Human Geo FRQs, such as the relocation, expansion, contagious, hierarchical, and stimulus. That is definitely a good thing to be able to review and understand before you go into your AP Human Geo FRQs, because you may have to be able to explain why culture and how it may diffuse in that kind of area. And some of the examples of culture is popular culture. So this is the cultural idea and practices and products that are generally accepted by many people. This is going to be your really widespread movies, music, and TV that are crucial to spreading this popular culture. They can help to reinforce cultural norms and values within a society. And social media is also a huge part of this popular culture. Like, think about TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. People all over the world can create accounts and share ideas. And as a result of how popular culture is spread, it is dynamic, constantly evolving, and changing to more accurately reflect the interests of people. Because as you know, from personal experience, I'm sure literally weeks can change and trends change and audios and all of that kind of stuff. It's always constantly dynamically changing. especially due to the easy access to technology. It becomes way faster to share, create, and consume content that ultimately helps to reinforce popular culture. In a contrast to popular culture, folk culture deals with more local and traditional cultural beliefs and practices. These are usually seen in more rural communities, with popular culture being more seen in urban communities. Folk culture is usually more tradition-based, it has a long history, and is passed down through generations, often through like oral history. Folk culture emphasizes interaction with the natural environment and community values, and since it emphasizes these specific points, it's hard to make it something that's going to have a lot of influence worldwide because it can be so dependent on the natural resources and everything that it needs around it. It's definitely a lot more localized and less likely to be influenced by external factors, whereas popular culture is basically only influenced by external factors, where traditional is much more difficult to change and diffuse. Some common examples of folk culture can be traditional clothing, music, food, and celebrations. And unfortunately, there are many ways that folk culture can be lost, as it can lose its influence because of the rise of popular culture. And when I think of comparisons to other units, and even within Unit 3, which most of culture patterns and processes is in, you can kind of compare this to ethnic religions and universalizing religions, with like popular culture being almost a relation to universalizing religions and folk culture being in relation to folk culture with ethnic religions. That is a really helpful comparison sometimes, just to make some comparisons. And now globalization, urbanization, and government policies and modernization all leads to the loss of folk culture. And again, this is all tied into Unit 3, which is a good unit to review, to have like an FRQ on globalization, being sure to tie in a lot of folk culture versus popular culture for sure. And now we have Cosette with economic globalization.
Okay, perfect. Let's get into economic globalization. So starting off, we have to understand what is economic globalization. Economic globalization is going to be the process by which economies around the world become interconnected. Again, that's one of the main themes of globalization that you'll see today, and how they also become interdependent through increased trade, investment, and financial flows. These are all different important parts of an economy, and globalization can be seen to strengthen these or even weaken these by creating a bigger economic gap. Some important things to note about economic globalization is that it's going to primarily revolve around the growth of global supply chains, the rise of transnational corporations, and the increasing importance of the global financial markets. Basically, what we understand is that all these economies around the world tend to truly rely on each other, that they trade, they do business together. All of this is interconnected and can help many economies grow. We also have to understand that there are going to be these negative effects as well. Again, when looking at globalization, there's going to be many critiques that arise, and we have to pay attention to those, because sometimes, even though we like to think of it as an amazing thing, we do have to understand the critiques, because these can be in your AP exam, especially maybe in a short answer question or one of your essay questions. So what we have to see is that, particularly to economics, it can have negative effects on different groups, such as increasing the wealth between countries, or by hurting countries within their trade, as they may not get the best deal when it comes to globalization and this increased trade. So, important term vocabulary to know about economic globalization is going to be neoliberalism. So basically, neoliberalism is the economic ideology that really emphasizes the importance of the free market, the privatization, and the deregulation of just kind of the economy in general. It's going to be one of the key drivers of economic globalization, as it promotes these policies that have helped in the past facilitate this international trade and increase the investment, and ultimately really kick up this interconnected and international trade that has helped our economies today, especially in the US. But we do have to see that this is, again, where the negatives of globalization comes to play. Neoliberalism has been criticized by a lot of people, especially in AP Human, for contributing to the inequality that's seen between different countries. It can also be seen that it's contributed to the environmental degradation as a result of having these economies hurt the environment with this increased trade. And finally, we can see that it also has contributed to social instability. So again, when looking at this globalization, there's going to be those negative effects as well as the positive. And then the next concept we'd like to go over about this economic globalization are going to be free trade agreements. Free trade agreements are these agreements between countries that eliminate or reduce tariffs and other trade barriers. So basically, these agreements are when countries work together to kind of come to this conclusion that will increase trade and investment because they're getting rid of the barriers that are already existing for these people to trade. So what we also have to understand, oh yeah, sorry guys, I will slow down. The important stuff is in bold, by the way. So those are going to be the key points that you have to like kind of really emphasize within this thing. Yeah, of course. Okay, so if anyone needs any more explanation, we can always like pause the video, answer questions, or go into the Q&A later and just like clarify any questions that everyone has. And people in the chat are also going to be helping with the questions. So again, going back to our free trade agreements, we can see that ultimately, because this is reducing the barriers that are existing within trade, such as like the tariffs, which is when people have to pay money to do exports or imports, they're going to get rid of those. And so companies are able to easily trade with each other, whether it be goods, services. And this is going to increase both countries' economic development, helping both countries' economies succeed. And thus we see this economic globalization occur. And then we'll now be moving on to political globalization with Emily.
All right, let's move on to political globalization. So when we define political globalization, it deals with political systems that are becoming increasingly interdependent and interconnected throughout the world. So what does that mean, right? So that means that like the governments of different countries are working together to now become more dependent on each other and are using each other as systems of government and are maybe creating organizations of different countries that weren't possible before because of the lack of advancement of technology. As governmental interaction increases across national borders, new organizations are created to govern at the global level and are able to respond to global issues. This type of globalization has a large influence on the way that governments interact at the global level, and countries are able to work closer together as communication has become easier. That's again the idea of space-time compression, as the world feels smaller and people are able to communicate. International organizations and transnational advocacy networks have grown as a result of this political globalization. So a bigger product of political globalization can be supranational organizations. These have emerged as political globalization has increased throughout the years, for sure, with two major examples being the United Nations and the World Trade Organization. The UN currently has 193 member countries, and the World Trade Organization has 159 member countries. So that really shows the span of their influence and how much influence they're able to have over their member countries. This also shows how they are able to promote their global norms and standards across a wide variety of countries. They are able to change governmental policies, sovereignty, the governance of a country. They can all be affected by the formation and operation of these supranational organizations. These impacts can lead to standardization with regulations for the member countries, provide a basis for political cooperation, and tie into economic integration at the global scale. So political or globalization can really tie into a lot of different things, as like laws can be made about culture, economics, and environmental as well. They are obviously, again, with these kinds of organizations, there are positives and negatives. So the negatives that can come with supranational organizations could be loss of sovereignty, uneven benefits between the member countries, and economic inequalities. However, these organizations can also lead to transnational political movements, which may try to correct some of these imbalances and use political globalization to be able to keep member countries in check. Transnational political movements they operate across national borders, and they can advocate for social or political issues at the global level. They can focus on issues such as human rights, social justice, gender equality, and labor rights. These movements can help to keep governments accountable, as people who don't even live in a country are able to advocate for people in other countries, as communication and the internet is able to keep people informed with issues that are happening. Like 30 years ago, people wouldn't have been able to understand what's going on halfway across the world like we can today. These movements can raise awareness for global issues, promote international cooperation and dialogue, and influence government policies on a global scale. These movements also can become extremely interconnected throughout the world, and they're able to reach a larger audience with their messaging and gain support of more people. And one of the key parts of the organization that you're going to want to know for political globalization would be the UN Sustainable Development Goals. You don't need to know all 17 of them for sure, but they are definitely a good example if you were ever asked in an FRQ to explain political globalization and the effects that it may have. And again, this would tie into Unit 4 and Unit 7 a lot for AP Human Geo. And then we're on to environmental globalization.
Okay, perfect. Moving on to environmental globalization. So basically what we have to understand is first the definition of what environmental globalization is. Environmental globalization is the process by which environmental issues and concerns basically become more interconnected and again, interdependent across national borders and around the world. So again, it's the spread of ideas. That's the core of globalization. So when we're looking at it in the terms of environmental globalization, it's going to be how these ideas of environmental awareness, climate change, everything around that is going to be growing interconnected across the world, the spreading of ideas everywhere. And so some important things to know again about environmental globalization is that it often involves global diffusion of environmental ideas, norms, and practices, as well as the increasing importance of global environmental challenges. Now, these specifically can include many different things, such as new advocacies and new different protocols to try and save the environment. It's new ideas around using sustainable energy, stop using fossil fuels. All of these ideas that have been spreading around the world are an example of environmental globalization. And this really comes up because people are starting to see the true impacts of how this negative consequences of climate change are affecting the globe and how these ideas are spreading, thus people want to take action. We can also see that this environmental globalization has, again, both those positive and negative effects. That's really important to note because positively, these ideas of trying to help save the world, trying to help be more eco-conscious are going to be globalized and spread across every nation. However, at the same time, as a result of globalization as a whole, there has been somewhat of an increase in pollution due to the spread of these trading agreements and this process where people are starting to overproduce because they want to keep trading and making money off of these goods that they're exporting. One of the key things that we can see within climate change is within environmental globalization is going to be the concept of climate change. So climate change, I hope you're all familiar with, is going to be one of the most pressing environmental challenges that the world really faces today. And it is caused by human activities. Examples of this are going to be burning fossil fuels, deforestation, and all of this is leading to rising temperatures, the sea level rising, and more frequent and more severe natural disasters. What we've been able to see is that this is a consequence of everyone from every nation, and it's starting to affect everyone from every nation, which is why climate change is often referred to under environmental globalization, because it's not just one nation's issue that they have to face and try and help, but instead it's an issue that we all have to work together to try and fix. Addressing climate change requires this global cooperation and action, and is going to be a collective action problem that can't be solved by any one country alone. It requires every nation from across the world to work together, come together, and help just ultimately stop this climate change from hurting more and more. The next topic under environmental globalization is going to be the concept of biodiversity loss. This is another environmental challenge that's kind of under climate change that the world is facing today. This biodiversity loss is again caused by human activities, such as habitat destruction as a result of pollution or deforestation, and is ultimately leading to the extinction of many species and the disruption of ecosystems around the world. Addressing this biodiversity loss is going to require global cooperation and action, because it's not happening in just one place. Again, this has been something that has been spread around the world. Now, I think it's a lot harder when I was studying AP Human to see how this climate change and biodiversity loss really fit into the category of globalization, because it seems like everyone's contributing to it equally. However, something to note about globalization as a whole is because of the interconnectedness, because of these new technologies and this new trade, we've seen an increase in industrialization, which is a good thing. But also because of this and this overconsumption that people have started to do because of globalization, we've ultimately seen all of these negative effects on the environment. So although it may be harder to directly see the link for environmental globalization as to trading, economics, and politics, it's still going to be a category under globalization, because it comes as a result of the spreading of ideas, goods, services, and everything else that's come with globalization. All right. And then next we are going to go into our second half, which is going to be just kind of the Q&A section.
Feel free to ask anything about globalization, anything about the test itself, anything about the Cram packets, or just any questions you might have for us. All right, looking at this first top question here, it says, how does globalization contribute to inequality and instability? So globalization can contribute to both of these by unequal, like if we're talking about political globalization here, we can talk about how resources might be allocated differently for different countries within the member. The member of the supranational organizations, some may not have the resources that they need, and may not be able to, because when countries are in these supranational organizations, they're all at different levels of development, and some may need more and some may need less help. But if they're all going to get equal help, it may contribute to inequality and instability.
Okay, the next question I see is, did globalization rise around the Industrial Revolution? So what we can see is that when you're looking at the lens of AP Human Geography, that's where we're gonna accredit a lot of the rise of globalization, because globalization has been occurring for a while, but it was at a slower pace. So when we really see it start to pick up again, that's going to be around the same time as the Industrial Revolution, when things are getting more technologically advanced and people are able to travel overseas and travel with ease. So they are interconnected. It's not going to be the root cause of globalization. However, it's often accredited to as one of the major causes and influences that has helped globalization reach the point it has today.
Okay, and reviewing on why globalization can be bad, when you're talking about cultural globalization, we can discuss the loss of folk culture and like losing history and not being able to, um, that's one of the main points is losing folk culture and losing those perspectives that may be taken over as popular culture begins to expand its influence.
Okay, I see a question by Kyle about, yeah, this is a good question because it's hard to say. Basically, the question is, how hard is the test and is it easy to get higher than half of everything? Again, it's really hard to predict what score you're going to get based on how much you get right because again, it's kind of like a ballpark that teachers use when they're talking to their students. I'd say from personal experience with a test, I honestly wasn't the best at multiple choice. That was where I struggled within practice exams and often found myself getting about 50% of those right or even less. But I still ended up with a 5 because I was able to really fine tune my writing response questions. So I'd say it is possible to get a really good score and pass the exam if you're not getting a lot of the questions right, as long as you're able to thoroughly balance your skills, review the content, and just be confident enough to know what you're doing. Missing a couple of multiple choice questions really isn't going to hurt you too much. It's really just how you choose to focus your time. So that's why we have these cram reviews in general, because having this review is going to help build your confidence and help you perform better on the test overall. And a lot of the material we're going over is going to be relevant and some of the most important things that are going to be highlighted on the test.
And adding on to that, I know that this is many people's first AP class, and it can be definitely a difficult thing to wrap your head around that getting so many wrong can still lead you with a good score. That was definitely hard for me to be able to wrap my head around, I remember at the beginning. Um, and I'm seeing something else that says you can only choose one answer choice on each multiple choice question, I believe.
Okay, I see another question about studying the vocab since it's a lot of vocab. The question, I'm going to sum it up, is like, what should we do about studying for the vocab? It's a lot, and how should we approach it? Basically, what I did is because AP Human is one of the AP tests with the most vocab that I've had to do, especially for this kind of like more history, not math, not science based class. And it's hard to memorize. Again, I recommend going through your notes, maybe making a Quizlet is what I personally did to go through every vocab term that I was to review and really highlight the main vocab terms within each unit. Within this review we just did, although it's like globalization, as you saw, there were so many different vocabs and specifics that are within one subunit of a unit. So just being able to break it down is going to really help you and prioritize which words you're studying because there's only a limited amount of time. And if you realistically can't memorize every vocab word, I would choose the ones from units and kind of disperse them because you're not going to need to know everyone on the test, but you can't predict what they're actually going to throw at you. But what I would recommend is doing a Quizlet. And again, we have these sessions that you can go to that are really going to help. We have our reviews that really highlight the best vocabulary that you should know when you approach the AP exam.
Yeah, that AP test is definitely coming up very soon. It's in 9 days, I believe, for AP Human Geo, and it's definitely a good resource to go check it out. And you can see it on, I believe there's a button at the bottom of the screen that says "Get your Cram Pass" if anyone is looking for that. For some tips for the FRQs, I would go and make sure to understand the FRQ task verbs. So those are going to be your identify, describe, explain. And what I would usually do is I would say identify is going to be your shortest response. You're not going to have to write like paragraphs for every single task verb. Identify for me, I always wrote one sentence. That's usually just identifying a vocab word. Describe, that's going to probably be about like 2 or 3 sentences, just depending on the thing. And then explain and explain to the degree are going to be the ones that you're going to have to elaborate more, give an example, and all that kind of stuff. Some of them, like identify or describe, are easier to answer just with a vocab term without a ton of explanation. But the explain and explain to the degree, you're definitely going to want to add in examples.
Also, for the FRQs, I know something that was intimidating for me, because I was like, this was my first ever AP exam when I took it, is having those visuals that they present you to kind of also base your question around. I would recommend, like, you have to be smart with your time, but you also are able to really take a minute and really think about what you're writing, because that's how you're going to get the most points. So before you try and go into it, make sure you understand the graphic or the visual or the concept that it's referring to before you answer, just to make sure you're on the right track for all 3 parts before you dive in and realize you made a mistake and have to go and redo it when you have such limited time per question.
And again, for people that are nervous for this AP test, I see a lot of that in the chat. It is totally okay if it doesn't go as expected. Obviously, you want to try your best and do your best, but this is a really good, especially if it's your first one, just to get the experience of taking an AP test and really understanding what it's like, just to have that feeling of test day. Like, okay, I'm setting yourself up for success. Like the night before, you can just chill, you can drink some water and all of that kind of stuff. How do you study the ESPN factors? I would say that I believe stands for environmental, social, political, or economic, social, political, and natural or environmental. I think that would be that is I feel like you really try to apply that to the different things. I always remember like economic, that's always like money and trade and all of that kind of stuff. Social is going to be a lot more a lot of like cultural and like connections, like people, all that kind of stuff. Political, that's going to be interactions between nations. And then natural and environmental, that's going to be like a lot of climate change, all of that kind of stuff. That's going to be really important.
Okay, I see a couple questions again. Do we need to know current events? It's not a requirement to know current events. However, I think it can be helpful if you look at current events. I know when I did human geography, I often did current events in my class, because you're able to apply the concepts and see the patterns that you learn within class to a real world example, and that really helps you understand it in depth. But again, it's getting kind of closer to the exam, so you don't have to know like every specific little current events ever, because this isn't going to be like a history class where you have to know every single event, every date. Instead, I'd focus on some of the biggest events that have really impacted AP Human Geography, such as the Industrial Revolution, the rise of technology, and things like that, just to really emphasize the concepts that you're learning within class and all those vocabulary items that you have to memorize.
And then I see a question that says, how do we get around the tricky answer choices? That is definitely difficult to do in multiple choice, for personal experience, because I believe there are 5 answer choices for every multiple choice question. I would do a lot of practice. I know a Fiveable has a multiple choice practice that is really helpful, and I would really just use the process of elimination. And if there's something that I don't know, I'm not going to click it. That's one of my philosophies in test taking. And I would also say that it's really important to just read the question, slow down for sure. That was an issue that I had, is sometimes I would just read the question too fast. Sometimes it's nice to just slow down, take a breath, read the choices carefully, like try to find similarities and differences in between the answers. See if they're using absolute terms, like it was only this or only this, when I feel like sometimes it's a lot of most of the time, and like some that are more, you want to stay away from more like exclusive answers. That would be my advice, unless you're like 100% sure that that's right.
Okay, I see some other questions. What's the hardest and most tested unit? That's kind of hard to say, because everyone has a unit that they struggle with. I personally, a lot of my friends struggled with econ, but that's something I really just clicked with me, while I struggled more with political things within AP Human. So I'd really identify what your weakness is and spend this next week really honing in on that weakness in order so you can develop your skills, because everyone here is different and everyone here has a different background in their knowledge. So I can't go out and say, really focus on this, because you may already know everything in that unit and there's no need to review it more than you already do. Instead, I'd recommend everyone take the time, sit down, and figure out where your weak points are. And once you've realized your weak points, go in and really hit those and study those units the most, because you're going to even up your skills and that's going to help you the most in the exam, since we can't predict what questions are going to be asked. And so that's really the advice I have to tell you if you're asking what should we study, what's going to be the hardest. I think that's really dependent on the person.
And then I see someone saying, do you think we can learn 7 units in 1 week? And that's an ambitious plan for sure. We are covering each individual unit at our cram sessions, so you definitely can get a basis of the things. Again, it depends on where you're at, but this is definitely a really good resource, because you're gonna come to these events and it's gonna be so much fun. We're all gonna be there, it's good. No matter where you're at, it's a good review to just make sure that you know like more specific details about each unit.
This is also something I've seen like people discussing in the chat about languages, countries, geography, religion, in general, all those social things. I think it is important to know. You don't have to know everything about like every country or every language. However, it's important to have a basic foundation which can help you answer some of the questions. I know something I did is, you may not have time for this, but I memorized where every country was on a map and in relation to others, just to get a basic idea and like where the languages were primarily and what religions were in which region primarily. That I feel like that's a little overkill. So you don't have to do that, especially with only a week left. But instead, I'd recommend really going through identifying like the main languages, again, the Romantic branch, or the main religions and where they go and how they interconnect, and just really hound those in, because I think that will serve you well when you're faced with comparative questions, especially in the multiple choice section. So if you could take the time, those are some good things to memorize. And I see the question, how much do you think memorizing language trees actually matters? I really can't predict the test. Again, in my year I took the test, there was questions about like languages and language tree, but I think if I got those wrong and I didn't know anything, it wouldn't hurt me too much, because I had some common knowledge about languages. But again, if you have the time, try and study everything. But if you don't, you don't. So focus on the bigger concepts within the units.
I'm seeing a lot of questions about acculturation versus assimilation. I know for sure this will definitely be something that's covered during our cram review things, but just as like a very quick overview, assimilation is usually forced, like changing cultures, and acculturation can be like adding into culture, like just taking like elements and adding in without having to like completely convert into like assimilation. Syncretism, that's the blending of 2 cultures, and that can also be the blending of like 2 languages. And then multiculturalism is again kind of similar to acculturation. Again, these will be covered much more in depth during the cram review packets, and all of that kind of stuff. Multiculturalism is just adding in elements of cultures, and that can also be a part of like many cultures in a country and that kind of stuff, and how they interact with each other. I'm seeing a question here for FRQ that says it's the difference between explain and explain to the degree. Explain, that's going to be a general thing, and then explain to the degree is going to be like how much or how little. That is how I would frame it. I would be like, it had a large impact or it had a small impact, something like that. That's going to be the difference between explain. And again, I would use examples for both. those are going to be your longest answers out of all of the task verbs for the FRQs.
I see a question about narrowing down in the multiple choice question. Once you've narrowed down to 2 answers, you've thrown away your lead distractors, which are usually the easiest to get rid of within the AP exam. You are now determining the factor between the 2. I think the key here is really dependent on the question. So I'll give 2 different examples of 2 different kinds of questions that I've seen on the AP Human exam. The first one is going to be answers where both of them, you're like, they have to be correct. Like, I've learned this, it seems so familiar in my brain, like I don't know which one to choose. And normally the question is going to be, which best answers this? Or it's going to have that sneaky word that Emily talked about earlier, those sneaky vocab words that really want you to think. So when it comes to what is most likely, what is best suited, anything like that, you really have to dive in and think about what was prioritized usually within the unit. And if the question has some other context within it, what goes in most relation and makes most sense with that context. Because again, both answers seem correct. However, you have to choose the one that's most suited for the question. But sometimes there's questions where you just really don't know. Maybe they both don't seem correct and you really don't know what to do. You may not know exactly what you're answering. You got rid of 2 because they're obvious, but you just don't remember the unit. Here is more, I would say, kind of a gamble. I would use your context clues, really dive into what makes the most sense, because again, it's one multiple choice question. They're all weighted the same and you only have so much time. So don't spend all of your time on one question because you could use that time answering questions you do know. At that point, you can just answer, go back to it later if you have enough time. But if you don't, you may as well just go with what your gut instinct says or what the context really points you to go to. Because at that point in time, there's probably no way to really narrow it down anymore if you are really unsure.
Yeah, and don't let that completely like take over your mind. Like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that one question. Like in the whole scale of things, you have a lot of multiple choice questions, and so now it's really helpful to be able to just guess because you're not penalized for a wrong answer. You just try to answer the most you can. And then I see another question about what type of diffusion is globalization. Globalization can be any type of diffusion. It can be all different types with like, then I know we always talk about the example about McDonald's, how they use stimulus diffusion to globalize throughout literally everywhere, and how they have different menu items to avoid all of like the different diet restrictions and all that kind of stuff. So it really can be all different types, and that is definitely something that is good to know for the AP test.
I see another question on what would be the most difficult unit to study. I kind of already said my spiel on this, on what I personally believe, and that's helped me through countless AP exams. Again, I think that's going to be personal. I recommend everyone here get the Cram pass. Obviously, that's going to be a lot of helpful review, but also I recommend that you go through every unit, kind of just jot down everything you know about each unit and see where your gaps are within your knowledge. And once you see those gaps, see what you don't know, focus on those, because for some people, units click better than others because AP Human covers a broad scope of topics that sometimes aren't very similar, like economics and politics and just socials are very different to understand for different people. So really getting to know yourself within this next week and what you know is going to be your best friend when last minute studying for this exam, because there's only so much content that you can go through within a week, realistically.
I'm seeing a question that says, is it better to skip an answer or bubble in a random answer? It is definitely better to bubble in a random answer. That is definitely the move because you are not penalized for any wrong answers. You want to answer all of them. Even if you say you have like 5 questions left and you're running out of time, bubble in your answers. And my favorite letter to bubble in is C, but that's just me. And then I see something that says, are the College Board videos worth watching? Those might be pretty in-depth for this point of the year, and I would definitely recommend, especially from our perspective, we've all been students that have taken the test and the class, and so we have that experience, so we know like what's important and all of that kind of stuff. So having our perspective in the Cram reviews can be really helpful.
Yeah, I completely agree. When I took AP Human and some other exams, I didn't watch the College Board videos just because with like my schedule, it was just too much to balance. And it was crazy. I actually did use Fiveable. And I think having that like dedicated review time that I'm like forced to go to, because like you have to watch the College Board videos on your own, that kind of feels like a little draining. Like you don't want to do it. You can procrastinate it, while this is like a live session that you attend to at the time was like a lot more helpful for me, because I did this for like AP Physics as well. And so just like having this community that can interactively answer your questions, and you know it's at a certain time every day, I think that really helps your structure when studying, rather than like relying on yourself, because like again, we all procrastinate, it happens, and sometimes that motivation is hard. So the College Board videos may not be the best idea for you, but they could also help. So it's whatever you personally think is best.
Okay, I'm seeing a question that says how much of the little like nitpicky historical events do you need to know? I would say you do not need to know like every single little detail of every historical event. That is definitely like you can definitely use some of those examples for like in your FRQs and your writing, but you don't need to know like everything down to like the specific date. Like I would say know like a general like timeline of like first agriculture revolution, second and third, and like that kind of stuff, but I wouldn't say that you need to know like exactly like World War One like details, like that kind of stuff. I think this is more about like I think also going to study like not only just like the vocab and the terms, but how everything like affected each other. That's also a big role in AP Human Geo.
Okay, I'm seeing a lot of last minute study tips or questions about how to study last minute. And so I'll do this as someone who also, I procrastinated a lot during like COVID years. And so I had to learn how to do this. I think the best thing is, again, you can only learn so much in a day. Like, I hate to say it, but you're not going to be able to memorize like everything in a couple days. Like, it's just impossible. Your brain can't do that unless you're like magic, maybe. But I would prioritize the biggest points that you think is most effective to learn. You can't learn everything, so try your best to learn the big concepts, learn some big examples, and maybe a couple specifics here and there. And that should hopefully be enough to get you by with a good grade. But again, it's impossible to learn everything. So prioritize what you don't know, what comes hardest to you, because there's a good chance your gut instinct or your context clues that you've had through going to class can help you answer a question. And if there's something you're totally clueless on, really focus in on that, because that's going to help you the most in the long run.
Yeah, so this is will these cram sessions help remember information from previous units? Yes, it will definitely help you. I know sometimes just hearing it again just helps me like going back and being like, oh, that is what the population pyramids are and that kind of stuff. That all of the we will go through every unit, every single unit of AP Human Geography for the cram sessions. They will definitely help you remember and maybe even learn some information that you didn't cover in class, because I know sometimes I would look at reviewer sources and be like, I don't know what that is, but now I know what that is. So that is always a good thing to have.
Okay, I see someone. How far in the future do you recommend advanced studying for the future? That depends on the person. I think, yeah, again, it's really up to you. I don't think I'm the best example for this kind of stuff. I tend to put things off last minute, but again, just like do what's best for you in the future. Maybe try 1, 2, 3 weeks ahead, really hardcore studying. But as long as you're going to class and paying attention, like we have faith in all of you.
Yeah, for sure. And then it says, do we need to know all of the models? I would say definitely the ones that you have like talked about in class and like the key ones. Um, those are definitely important ones to know and understand how they work, because you may get an FRQ that has a model on it and you may have to like explain the downfalls and the pros and the cons. And so sometimes it's helpful just to like sit down and just see if you can draw out the models and like write down like what you can explain about it and all of that kind of stuff. But also don't get like super stressed out about all of this kind of stuff, because when you're more stressed out, it might be a little bit more it might be harder to learn. And make sure you're taking breaks when you're studying, especially if you're trying to learn all of the units this week. Let's just like take a breath, drink some water, you take some time for yourself. And we all Yeah. It's gonna be everything is gonna be great. It's just gonna be great.
Ooh, any tips for remembering certain models slash people, such as the urban models? Okay, I'm trying to think what I did in class really helped me. I don't know if you are able to do this, but I know in my class, we did arts and crafts, as in we built the models and then we kind of compared them with our friends and just made it into an interactive activity. That's an example. We're going to go over all the models in our Cram reviews. So if you attend those, that's going to be an extra review. But I think really like tying things into like doing things yourself, such as making it into an activity, watching a video such as a Cram review, those interactive activities tend to help me the most because memorizing them can be hard because there's going to be a lot you have to do this late in the game. And so making it interactive, making it fun, and then just again, coming to these review session, you're already making the right step forward.
I know one thing that we did for urban models was we went outside and we drew them with chalk. That was something that really helped me remember everything. And like just like doing things in like different creative ways, that really helps. And our review packet that we have with that goes along with our crayons will be extremely helpful with everything because that was made by us and we are knowledgeable in the subjects. And so we're going to provide you so many resources that can make you feel really confident, as Sylvia has been saying, and it's really helpful to get all of these different resources and perspectives.
Yeah, again, guys, like I think the beautiful thing about Fiveable with our reviews is we literally our whole team working on this. We were all students, and I know sometimes, like again, as I saw in the chat, sometimes people don't get the best learning experiences in the classroom, and we understand that. We've all had teachers who we didn't click with, we couldn't understand the concepts, and so because of that, we have the foundations to provide the resources you actually need to succeed on the exam and do well in AP exams because everyone on our team has taken exams and done super well in these exams. Also, I saw a question about the Asian tiger countries. I do not believe Japan is one of them, but I could be wrong, but I don't believe it is.
I see a question that says did we all get fives on the AP Human Geo exam? I can say that I did for sure. I definitely yeah.
All did really well. Don't worry,
Yeah,
guys.
we all did really well. And so it's really helpful that we know like what we do and what's needed to score well on the test and all of that kind of stuff. So it says, where can we find the fill-in review packets for the first 2 nights? Yes, that'll be available to you before night 1. Just remember to click the button down here. Let's get your Cram pass, or you can go to the Fiveable website and go under Crams to figure out how to register for it.
Yeah, you'll be getting it before the Cram, and then the point is to kind of fill it in as you're going through the Cram and just helping you again review while you're doing the Cram sessions. Did I use Fiveable for my exam? I didn't know about Fiveable when I took my AP Human exam, but I did use it for my AP Physics exam and my AP World exam. And I did the Crams back in the day, and they really helped me, just so you guys know. And I did well on those tests. So, yeah.
I used Fiveable for my AP Human exam for sure, and I definitely think that was really key and helpful. I really liked reading like the different guides. Like if there was anything I was confused on, it was a really nice, like quick, easy source to look at. Yeah. So that was really helpful for me.
And I still use the articles too. Those are helpful.
Yeah, I still use them in all my AP classes for other subjects as well.
Any last questions, guys? It's coming to an end soon. Yep, again, the slideshow will be distributed to everyone who came and signed up for this. So don't worry about that. You'll have that resource.
And then here's just a reminder for all of the nights that we'll be covering everything for the Cram schedule. It starts on the 29th and it will end on the night before, so we'll all get super excited and it'll be super fun. And then a reminder to follow Fiveable on socials to see more content and be able to just use it as a good review site.
All right, everybody. Thank you guys so much for joining us tonight. Thank you guys for being awesome participants. And make sure to follow Fiveable on social media. Make sure if you still need to get that Cram pass locked down, get a hold of it. And we're going to be super excited to see you guys in just a few days for the Cram finales. So that is it for us for tonight. Have a wonderful rest of your night, everybody. And we will talk to you all very soon. Take care.